Welcome to Changemaker Q&A, a podcast brought to you by the School of Social Impact. This is the show where we explore ideas, frameworks, and lived experiences to help you navigate the journey of making change. Today, we're asking a big question. What does hip-hop have to teach us about creating change? To help us answer that, I'm joined by Manny Faces, a journalist and scholar who has spent years documenting the ways hip-hop drives innovation in education, health, and activism. Together, we'll look at how hip-hop moves beyond music, offering a cultural framework that helps us rethink how we work, organize, and build more just communities. So, thank you so much for joining me. Do you think you could begin by just introducing yourself and letting our audience know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure, and thank you again for having me and taking the time. It's an honor to be here with you. I go by the name Manny Faces. That is not my government name. My real name is Bobby Elbows. I'm just kidding. That's stupid. That's a dumb joke. But that's the name I go by. I've been doing a number of things under that moniker for a bunch of years. I've been a musician of sorts, a producer, remixer, DJ. But most relevant is that I've been a journalist. I'm now an author and a independent scholar, and my focus has been on the uniquely powerful ability of hip hop music and culture to help uplift humanity and improve society. And that's usually in ways that I focus on are areas like education and health and wellness and science and technology and politics and activism and social justice and other areas that don't necessarily or that aren't necessarily the first thing that comes to mind when people think about hip hop. And so I've done that through journalism. I'm a podcaster myself, and I've done a lot of writing, and I have recently published a book on the subject. And through sort of that collection of ways to do this sort of outreach, that's what I do. I amplify and signal boost those ideas and the people and organizations that are doing that kind of work in an effort to preach the gospel to anyone who might listen or who might be inspired by the things that I talk about.
That's really interesting. Before we dive into, I guess, the intersection of social change and all of these topics with hip hop, do you think you could clarify for anybody listening exactly what you mean when you say hip hop? Like, what is hip hop culture? Is it the same as rap, or how does it kind of differ to that?
Yep. Good foundational understanding is important. So to many, and many listening, maybe not, but you never know. Hip hop is thought of as a genre of music, right? It's just it's one of the styles of music. It's last I checked, among the most popular in the world, and it is that, and it has always been that. Many people will call the genre specifically rap music, but they are fairly synonymous when it comes to music and genre of the music business, and that's confusing to people who hear hip hop being discussed in a larger way through a cultural lens, through a social movement lens, because it is also that. So what we like to make that distinction of hip hop the culture or hip hop the overarching umbrella term of which rap music or the genre of hip hop falls under. Um, the origins of hip hop are in its artistic elements, four elements that that are generally attributed to hip hop: uh, DJing, rapping, breaking or the dance element, and graffiti or the visual art element of hip hop. There's a fifth element, very often attributed, the element of knowledge. And so that's knowledge of self, knowledge of community, knowledge of from whence all of this came, knowledge of the world. And what you start to see when you got folks that are really engulfed in this culture from more than a just performative or outside or, art, art for the sake of making art or the industry side of things. If you're really within it and you've established some identity, cultural identity through the lens of hip hop, you start to see the world through the lens of hip hop. And those cultural glasses that you see things in are derived. Sometimes we do it automatically. Sometimes folks don't realize that this is something they've picked up from the culture, and it's And it's because of those artistic elements and the way that it's evolved throughout the decades now, 50 plus years, that all of this has been around. It's become much more than just the genre of music, just more than just rap music. And it's crept into and influenced literally, I think, and I make the case often, and I haven't lost the challenge yet, like almost every aspect of humanity can you can see an influence of hip hop's presence. And so that doesn't happen from just a genre of music. That really does come from a something that's more of a cultural ethos, for lack of a better term.
When would you say that like hip hop, like as a culture and as you kind of explained it, when would you say that it kind of like emerged historically or where? And did it kind of emerge from like one place in the world, or was it something that kind of emerged in different places at the same time? Because like I'm kind of picturing it in my head as almost like a countercultural like way of life, but I could be completely wrong in assuming that. So I'm wondering like what's kind of like the history there?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely. In fact, you're absolutely right. People will point to the origin story, right, of hip hop and where it came from, and the origin story is fairly well known. Some of the details are still being worked out by historians who now there's a lot more people taking the history of this thing seriously. Again, 50 some odd years now, it wasn't always uh, meticulous records of its beginnings weren't always kept. But the long and short of it is that in New York City in the early to mid 1970s, New York City was very parts of New York City, particularly the Bronx, South Bronx specifically, was very run down, very underfunded, very under resourced, very underloved by the rest of the city. The city was going through financial troubles, as you know, probably anywhere in the world where a place is going through financial troubles, the most marginalized folk get affected, the first and the worst, right? So this was happening in the Bronx. Communities were losing funding. They were losing music programs in the schools. They were losing art programs in the community. There was like they were losing, like, firemen wouldn't come to put out fires. Like, they just didn't have they weren't, they lost the resources. Uh, there's an old term saying that in that time the Bronx was burning, and that comes from a specific incident where buildings were just on fire all the time. Landlords were burning the buildings on purpose to get insurance money. It was just it was all pretty bad. But from that, there were gang activity. It was pretty bad. But from that, there began to emerge the artistic, forms that we think of when we think of hip hop, DJing and rapping and dancing and things like that, started to coalesce and started to come together in an interesting way. Now, none of this, there's a rapper named Grandmaster Caz, pioneering guy, who said in a great documentary called The Art of Rap, which is a great way to look into the rap side of things from a pretty good angle. But he said in there, he said, hip hop didn't invent anything, but hip hop reinvented everything. And so we say counterculture. It was in response to a lack of resources. It was in response to no musical programs. So there were DJs playing records, and they would make these, have these park jams, and they would develop a way to extend the drum break in the middle of a song so that the dancers would have a good time dancing over this particular part of the song. They had to do that with two turntables. So you had to go back and forth. What we take for granted now, we see a DJ do this all the time. They invented this, and it was a way to, hey, we're going to make our own music out of these things that we have that aren't in lieu of no music classes and these things, and a way to get our frustrations out and a way to get our expression. Graffiti writers say, oh, vandalism is horrible. It's, you're destroying the city. And I look at it like, well, here's a graffiti writer who writes his name in a particular way, and that train that it's on travels all through the city. Now, here's a place where these young visual artists thought, no one cares about us. No one thinks about us. They've forgotten about us. But when you look up and you see that train, you're going to see my name. You're going to see my style, and you're going to know that I exist. Right. And so by doing that, they are counterculture. They are pushing back against the conditions that have been, laid on top of them. And that grew and evolved over many, many years. So the spark was right around that time. There was a gang treaty in 1971. And so the gang activity kind of settled down. And as this music and artistic stuff picked up over the next few years, it became sort of the outlet and the way to replace physical altercations and violence with, well, we're gonna battle it out on the dance floor. We're gonna battle it out. We're gonna out rap each other, and we're just gonna use that as our outlet. So, and of course, this wasn't being done. Now, again, they didn't invent anything, but they reinvented everything. So they didn't invent music. They didn't invent the music. They were using music that had existed already. From James Brown and Parliament Funkadelic and some of the disco songs, but they were just reworking them or repurposing them or remixing them, right, in a way that allowed them to do their thing with what already existed. And that entire genesis and honestly, everything that followed is that it's a remix culture. It's a way to take what we have, fill a need or a void in a way that it wasn't designed to be this way. We're just going to reverse engineer the hell out of all this and make something new. And so through the years, you see that a lot in messaging and how they push back in rap songs. Later, you see it being much more commercialized, much more part of an industry, and so you see less of that on the front facing side, the rap music side. Uh, Older folks, have watched the whole genre over years would say, yeah, we used to have songs on the radio about Black Power, and we'd have songs that would talk about these things that were happening, and then like at some point it changed, and all that music went away, and now it's just like party music or negative quote unquote music on the radio. That doesn't mean that any of those counterculture aspects of the music and the culture associated with it went away. It just they've now evolved as it does. It remixed itself and said, okay, we're not on the radio anymore, but hey, we're going to be in schools. We're going to use hip hop to make kids learn things better. You see it on Broadway. You'll see it, all these different new intersections is now the current iteration of how it's continues to be that counterculture you talk about.
Hmm. That's really interesting. I like what you said about it being like a remix culture. And I think
Yeah.
this idea of like remixing things will probably relate to a lot of our audience who are kind of like activists, or they're kind of stuck in a situation where they're like, everything around me is kind of effed. But
Yeah.
like you don't have to completely like reinvent your surroundings or your society. You can like remix things and you can take what already exists and kind of work it in a way to make it better or work for you. I really like that. I'm wondering how hip hop then provides kind of like a framework for organizations or movements or groups to then kind of use in the work that they're doing.
Exactly, by remixing some things. Yeah, absolutely. So it's looking at examples. So what I talk to a lot of people that have done sort of that intersectional work, right? That remixing of it. And some of it can be very specifically applied to the education space, to health and wellness spaces, to activism spaces. And through that, so how do you do that? You look at some case studies. You look at what people have done. Right. So in the education space, it's probably the most mature. I'll take it back. It's by mature meaning not like versus immature, but like having existed the longest time and become more advanced education, but activism too to a certain degree, because again that's in its roots. It is activism. It's by its very nature activism, and for a time it was a little bit more uh, the front facing part of hip hop. It was looked at as activism. There were political conventions of hip hop folks that looked like say in this mind view, this worldview. But that's not the case anymore. So, like I said, it's resurfaced in different ways that I think people in those industries you talk about, or activists or change makers, right, can find inspiration in. And the book is called Hip Hop Can Save America. It everyone says, it can save the world too. And I'm like, I know, that's the next book. Give me a break. Let me do this one first. But the subtitle is Inspiration for the Nation from a Culture of Innovation. And so I don't give solutions, but I give inspiration. And so some examples in the education space. Uh, in New York City, a bunch of years ago, there was a program called Fresh Prep, where students are struggling to, pass state mandated exams, right? And they were just struggling. They, again, underfunded school district. They weren't getting the education they deserved, and they were failing these tests. But you have to pass them, or else you don't graduate. So they developed this program. It's a collaborative hip hop learning program. They bring teaching artists into the classroom to work with the teachers and get these kids to kind of learn their stuff, learn the material through songs and et cetera, et cetera. Something that nowadays is we see a lot of that, right? We've seen Hamilton. We know how much you can learn from listening to this stuff. But this was, some years ago, and it wasn't as prevalent. And those kids went on to pass those state mandated exams at like an 80% rate after failing, some of them failing multiple times. And if you see that now that's one easy thing to do, rote memorization. You do a rap song about a thing. Now you know the thing. Okay, cool. But you see other applications from that have evolved to work on young people's social and emotional learning skills. SEL educators use programs that have been specifically geared towards science or maybe STEM. So it's grown into this, I don't say industry. It's grown into this ecosystem where you can find ways to enhance educational outcomes, incorporating the music and the culture in many, many different ways. I don't care the subject. I don't care the demographic. I don't care the age. It exists. So these things exist. So educational justice is providing, equal and, better education to everybody. Here are some tools that have been shown to work, and they either require funding or they require a more tolerant or a less intolerant school system. We're having a lot of problems with that here, at the moment. And we can see this in mental health therapy, where school counselors have turned their offices into recording studios, and young kids we're not good about talking about our trauma and our fears. And, we want to bottle it up, especially you come from neighborhoods where you don't really, vulnerability isn't your first language. But he's found a way. Dr. Ian Levy, he's one of the folks that pioneered this stuff, has built recording studios. And I don't know about you in school. When I was, they were like, "Oh, write an essay about how you feel about a thing." I'm not writing nothing. Get out of here. But if you ask kids today to rap about it, they will, especially when you come at them with that cultural authenticity. Hey, and Dr. Ian Levy's a white dude, but he raps, so he knows how it goes. So you meeting these kids halfway saying, listen, I respect how you see the world. I respect how you talk. I respect how you express yourselves. Let's try it here and see if it makes you feel comfortable. These kids that came together didn't want to talk about these things, ended up making songs together, not just talking to the counselor, but talking to each other. Peer groups now are forming. They're making mixtapes together about their experiences. Then the next year, the kids are coming in, they heard about it, they want to come and do the same thing. So you have this rotating cast of characters coming in. And that's, I mean, I don't know if you can really quantify it, but that's saving lives. That's doing something different. Where traditional, outdated or, Eurocentric or whatever, culturally irrelevant ways of doing therapy, weren't going to crack these kids, and weren't going to break through to these kids. So you see that. And then lastly, in terms of activism and specifically, there's an organization called Transform Alabama, one of the states that has sort of a potential, maybe not immediately, but to be more fair, right, in terms of voter representation, and perhaps go from a Republican state, a red state, to a blue state, if the communities, that are there in populace but not always in active, being active in the political process, can get activated. And there's an organization called Transform Alabama, run by Dr. Adia Winfrey, who is a psychologist also, and did some hip hop psychology work. Also ran for Congress, didn't win, but learned the system a little bit, and now uses all of that, reaching the youth, reaching communities of color, particularly through hip hop, to get them active in the political process in ways that, again, they might have been turned off to. They might not have even been paying attention to. They might feel completely jaded and disillusioned at this point. But when you come in with this cultural connection, again, across all demographics, but because everybody, listens to hip hop, but when you come in with this cultural relevancy, this cultural understanding, and it's authentic and it's with intention, people will respond to that in ways that, other methods just don't work anymore. So 3 examples, 3 genres or 3 fields, right, where this can happen. And I could give you hundreds more. And so I think it's by looking at some of these things. First of all, just getting over the idea that, wait, hip hop can do what? What? Like getting past that, opening a little bit to kind of the things that I'm talking about, and then exploring what works for you, what works for your uh, organization. You talk about organization companies that want to have, better understanding of, diverse thoughts and communities, and really mean that, because some of them say it, but they don't really mean it. You could bring in hip hop folk to do that, because nothing is more inclusive and welcoming as a global cultural, you know, connective force than hip hop. Right? Not religion, not sports. We all got our teams. I'll fight you to, on a team. I'm a Knicks fan. You're not gonna tell me anything but Knicks. And certainly not politics. I challenge anyone, and no one's answered it yet, to find something more able to bring people together across all kind of demographics and ideologies and backgrounds and ways of life globally than hip hop. So if that's the case, we know that's the case. That's in front of our eyes. How do we take the good parts, right? That DNA, the thing that it does so well. Forget all the other stuff that you might think is attributed to hip hop, all the, whatever you think. This exists. So my thing is, we focus on that and we apply it to the places where we're trying to build community and build constituency and bridge gaps and bridge divides, because nothing does that better than hip hop, if you ask me.
That's really interesting, and I've, yeah, never thought about it like that, but it's so true. It is probably like one of the most like truly inclusive, like genuinely inclusive movements or aspects of society.
Yeah,
And
Tony Blackman, who's a great artist and author and activist in her own right, has said, and I just want to quote her, that she says, you could pick me up, put me anywhere on the planet, not in the water. This doesn't help if it's the ocean, but where there's people. Put me anywhere in the world, and she goes, and I'll be able to find the hip hop. I don't care where you put me, random place. I will find the hip hop, and not only will I find the hip hop, but I'll have a place to eat, and I'll probably have a place to sleep that night. Like, that's powerful stuff. She's absolutely true. I've done it. I've gone around the world. I can come where you are right now and be like, let's go. And then half an hour, we'll find it, and we got friends. And we got, because we have this global cultural language and this global that transcends all that other stuff. So it's about, finding ways to tap into that in an authentic manner with folks that are like from the culture, that are doing that work and know how to do it.
mm, as you were sharing some of those examples before, I was thinking about how, like, from my perspective, the way I see it is like, and I think you kind of see this if you looked at like hip hop, like music as well, and look at like rap music, but essentially like the thing that like defines it is it's storytelling. It's like people telling stories. And I think these examples that you've shared, where like students don't want to, write an essay, but
Right.
they'll share their story in another format. And I always think that like storytelling is one of the most like powerful tools that we have to change the world, because it's stories that connect us, but it's also stories, like stories are how we make sense of the world. Like we make sense of everything around us because we relate it to our own story. When we think about our past or when we think
Right.
about our future, like we see it as almost like a movie playing out in our heads. Like we don't think in like facts or figures or like these perfectly like structured sentences. Like we think in stories. And so I think that's why storytelling as a communication tool is so powerful. And I think
Yeah.
that really kind of shines through in those examples that you shared.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree completely.
Mm. When you're speaking to or working with audiences who maybe are not as receptive to this idea, how do you kind of get through to them? I'm thinking like, I don't know, really like corporate people or
Mm.
I don't know, people who are just like not receptive to this idea. Like, how do you kind of get through to them and get them to kind of see the value that hip hop can bring?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of layers of folks who are not receptive. I think that, there's folks that are not receptive because, again, like, this isn't known information, right? This is a weird thing to come and, and to a seminar and be like, hip hop can save your business. Like, what? That doesn't even make sense. But they're open minded enough to hear some of this stuff. And I don't know. I gave you some examples. You're like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Like, most people listening are gonna be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like I'm not saying it's a panacea. It's not no magic. It's not abracadabra, but these are things. And I'm saying that if there's a slight chance that this is able to do something that none of y'all have figured out so far, right? Then I think most people who really want to make a change maybe wouldn't be receptive to this idea until they heard some of these examples, open-minded enough to say, okay, tell me more. This is interesting. I see the benefit in this. So it is just a matter of educating. There's other folks that are just not, they don't want the end goal. Well, the end goal is, equality and equity and, giving everyone, level playing field and all the things, right? And they might, they might shield that because that's a very, no one's gonna come out and say it, but no, I don't want everyone to, I don't want everyone to have the same thing I have. That's ridiculous. They won't say that, but then they'll say, well, and then they'll bring up all of the negative connotations within, in what I'm talking about. And I've had to do this. I've had to, especially, internet folk, trolls and all that. And sometimes I engage because it's good practice. Um, but, it's this isn't theoretical anymore, right? So if you're corporate, if you're organizational, and you want some of the things that these tactics or these, I don't even want to say tools, tools are very, exploitative kind of word, right? That these collaborations can bring, right? Because you want to collaborate with the community. You want to bring in these experts, and not to extract from them. Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, who's a great educator and started this idea of culturally relevant pedagogy, teaching, with culture, centered, which is where a lot of this comes from, said, we don't want teachers to, do hip hop or use hip hop. We want teachers to be hip hop. So pushback is going to come from, well, we don't want to be hip hop. That's crazy. We just want to use it, but you have to show that, again, these are the outcomes that are going to emerge, but you have to do this authentically. You have to do this a certain way. And it's all brand new to folks. So I think just giving, case studies, giving examples, and honestly, it's translating it into a language that they understand, right? We found this in education. Great examples. Again, because it's the most mature of these intersections. There's all these things have come up before. We have teachers who are like, no, I got to use hip hop in a classroom. And the administrators are like, that's crazy. We're not, not doing that. Hip hop is gang culture. We're not going to do that in the classroom. That's insane. And they'll be like, hold on, let me teach you about some of the things that I'm talking about. And you learn about the cipher, right? So this is not a new thing, but it's another thing that hip hop remixed and reinvented. Just the simple idea of being in a circle, right? A circle of folks. And so when hip hoppers perform and rappers perform and dancers perform, they do it in a circle. This goes back to, the origin of civilization with drum circles, right? Or healing circles. This is nothing new. But in the context of, performing their art, it has to be a circle. It has to be a cipher. When the Olympics were there and the breaking in the Olympics for the first time, it was in a circle, and that was purposeful. So you do that because it gives everybody, visibility and a sense of belonging and inclusivity and equity. We're all equal. We're all in the circle together. No one's at the center, no one's at the top, no one's at the bottom. We're all here together. And we take turns. We take turns rapping, and then the next person goes. And we take turns dancing. And you've seen a break in cipher. And as a matter of fact, people got to see this maybe for the first time in the Olympics. That's why, despite some of the controversy, I know I'm talking, so I'm not going to say anything too much.
No, I have like national shame when I
my God. Despite all that, one of the great things we see is an example of the cipher in action. The people surrounding, and the way I look at it is, hip hop artists take turns in the cipher in the middle of the circle while the community holds the space. It's a beautiful thing. Again, Tony Blackman, who I mentioned before, who you can't drop in the ocean. She wrote a whole book called The Wisdom of the Cipher, and it's about the power of the hip hop cipher in fostering, visibility, equity, belonging, and inclusivity. And so you explain all that, and they're like, okay, and be like, well, that's social and emotional intelligence. See, that's a buzzword that educators want to teach. but they don't recognize it as social and emotional intelligence. They don't think you could teach social emotional intelligence from hip hop, but that's exactly what the cipher is. It's what it represents. And so if you just bring your students into a cipher and you perform in a, or you teach in a site, or you teach this concept, they've now increased. They now realize social. Now they're like, oh, I get. This is Dr. Bettina Love, who's in the book. Broke this down, and she said that's how we have to break through. Because sometimes, again, unless it's just plain like racist or just don't want to do any of this stuff, they'll be open to the idea, but you have to it's so foreign. You have to translate it. And if you start using the terminology they're familiar with, social and emotional intelligence, oh, okay, I get it. Storytelling, right? You tell so many stories. You can teach so many things, so many literary devices can be found in hip hop. So I don't want you, how I would bring hip hop lyrics into the class. And why? Because you could teach allegory, you could teach metaphor, you could teach simile, you could teach alliteration, you could teach. Oh, okay. Tell me more. So I think it's just about breaking down that little barrier where it's just been so popularized of what hip hop is, and less is known about all this other stuff. So I think once you break that down, most folks I found who are genuinely maybe not even open minded because they're probably I don't know, but they'll see the value in it if you just translate it in these ways. You give case studies, you give examples, um, and then you translate it for them. And if at that point they don't want to entertain it, well then maybe it's for different reasons.
I think the concept of like the circle is really useful, especially in like education settings, because I feel
100%.
like a teacher is teaching like within a circle. It's kind of like an equalizer.
Yep.
Like you kind of get rid of those like power dynamics that you have when like there's an authoritative figure teaching to the
Right.
class. Whereas like when the whole class is like there in a circle, like they're all there kind of together.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting.
And you see it in like peer groups or Alcoholics Anonymous. It's there. It's there in society. So when you show that to the educators who never thought of it like that, I'm like, well, why don't they do it in Alcoholics Anonymous? Why do they do that? Because they don't want anyone to feel lesser than, even though there's clearly a person in charge. There's a moderator. There's a person in charge of the meeting. But they're like, hey, we all here together. We're trying to, and it's just a simple thing. So I've seen that then translate into town hall meetings where the and this is what I want to. That's why I tell mayors and folks who are in a position of authority that the best way to connect with your folk is to not start off like you're in a position of authority. Like I'm just one of you. I work for you, right? So I'm here with you. We're all sitting together. What are we doing? So yeah, so it's a circle. But again, it's not new. Um, but if you look for the reasons why you can drop us anywhere in the world and find community, it's because that's in its DNA, the cipher, the idea of equality, of removing that barrier, removing that, you know, it's like, look, they lined you up in classrooms to train you for the factory, right? I mean, this is the old story, right? So remove that. If you remove it, the kids don't even know what you've done. They don't even know it's being done to them. They just go, oh, seats in a circle. This is interesting. Okay. They just sit down. But just by the nature of there not being like someone in the front of the classroom versus the back of the class. I mean, like even that dynamic of you need to sit in the back of the class, you're not paying attention, or you sit in the front of the class, so you're the teacher's pet. Like it gets rid of all that. There's no dynamic. It's just we're here together, and I mean, again, it just kind of makes sense when you think about it that way. And so that's one of the many lessons that can come from looking at the world through a sort of a hip hop influenced lens to try to recreate the good things about the culture.
Mhm. For a change maker who's listening to this and they're kind of interested in starting to explore the world of hip hop more or how hip hop could kind of influence their own work or their own field, what are some of the first steps that you would kind of recommend?
Well, I'm a little selfish. Listen to me. No, but but yes, I mean, so part of my job, and again, I've probably mentioned 10 names tonight. To point people in directions, and it's really just to demonstrate that there's a wealth of knowledge out there that exists in folks that have been doing this work for a long time, or some semblance of it, or have put it together in a format. that could be adapted or could be learned from. And again, excuse me, like I said, the book is inspiration for the nation, right? Inspiration for the nation from a culture of innovation. So we can inspire. So it does require a little legwork to get a better understanding. If you're an educator, I've interviewed 100 people, and a bunch of them are educators. If you're into political activism, I've interviewed a bunch of people along those lines as well. So I'm a little selfish in that I do. That's why I'm here, right? I'm saying come into my ecosystem, come into, buy the book. You can buy it from me. I'll sign it for you. It'd be nice. Give you a nice little gift. But buy the book, learn, because the book is just filled with the same people. Like, I've highlighted people, but I've given a commentary as well that kind of threads it all together so that you can understand that it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? So that's the first step. The first step is to, pick your field, or depending on your field, pick a person or pick an organization that has done this work, maybe not perfectly in alignment with you, or find a very similar field. If you're in healthcare, if you want to equal or get a better understanding of what it's like to work with folks that are not from your community. There's a lot of folks that go to different communities, right? And I mean, y'all have this, we have this, everyone has this. And that you want to get better results. You want to have a better rapport. You want to get better outcomes. And that comes from learning how to be a member of the community. There are people that have done that, and they've used hip hop. And you can use hip hop. You don't have to. The best thing about a hip hop framework for approaching these problems is it doesn't have to include beats and rhymes. It really doesn't. It's just there to inspire you to think outside all the boxes and build better things with what we already have and remix it all. The way to do that has been exemplified all through the examples that I provide and the folks that, I highlight and their work. So the first step is to look at the people that I profile. And then if you want to really know more, the other thing that I'm doing a lot of these days is guiding in that regard too. So they would come to me and say, "Well, this is what we're trying to do," and I'll know from this wider network of folk. We have people we can connect you with that are much more aligned to that specific need that you might have. And so we start to put together consulting and connecting some dots for folks. But yeah, look for it. It's like people say like, I used to like rap when I was younger, and everything today kind of sucks. And this is the same thing for any musical genre, any art form. Movie fans will say this, rock music fans will say that, oh, these kids today, right? The great thing about hip hop is that whatever you liked is still being done. Whatever you like about any genre is probably still being done. So don't tell me that you can't find it. Just tell me, tell me you don't want to look for it without telling me. You know what I mean? So you have to do a little bit of the legwork. I exist in the realm of what I do to try to make that a little easier for folks. But it exists, and it can be it exists probably in any field that a change maker might be working in. And if it doesn't, it's even better because you could pioneer it. But the lessons will come from these other intersections that have already existed.
Yeah, I'm already like starting to like think in my head how I could like apply this in my own work.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the goal. Yeah.
Definitely keen to read your book. Where can I find your book? Is it on Amazon?
It is on Amazon. You can also buy it directly from the publisher. It's on Peter Lang, which is an international academic press. So if your international audiences, maybe get it that way. If it's not available on Amazon, it comes and goes on Amazon, and then you can get it from me directly, which will cost me a lot to ship it. But I do an author copy. So all that can be found. All the links to that, obviously you can look it up on Amazon, but the other links to the publisher and to author copies are at my website, which is Manny Faces. Oh no, quiet. Oh no, noise. I'm sorry. Which is on my website, mannyfaces.com, MANNY faces.com. Nothing crazy there. And the entire ecosystem that I'm speaking about and the book and everything me can also be found at hiphopcansaveamerica.com. And I promise you that that these lessons can be applied globally. But that's just where I started to try to fix the problem. We got a lot of things to fix here. So give me some time, but I'll get to the rest of the world too. Also, just throw in there are brilliant examples from throughout the world. I do focus domestically, but we've seen, especially if you want to talk about political activism, I got to say, America started it. We invented hip hop. We're brilliant at it, and we exported it to the world. And y'all have done great things with it throughout the world. One of the things that y'all actually kind of do a little bit better than us, because we're very I don't know if you heard, we're very capitalistic in America. Um, One of the things that happens in other parts of the world is, hip hop much more, you know, influencing local politics, national politics, from a musical artistic standpoint. There's things that we need to re-import back, from around the world. However, the ways that hip hop can really influence social change, social innovation, doesn't have to just be beats and rhymes and artists. Like, these intersections are, I think, just as valuable, if not more. So it's just a lot happening around the world. So anyway, hiphopcouldssaveamerica.com, mannyfaces.com, and come into our ecosystem. I have a newsletter from, that goes out, that spreads information, curates some stories about this stuff. So if you're interested in hearing more, learning more, you can check the archives of the newsletter, check the archives of the podcast, all the people I talk to, and stay tuned for more.
Thanks for listening to Changemaker Q&A, a production of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. We'd like to thank our sponsors and partners who make this show possible. Whether you're just starting your changemaking journey or looking to fill your changemaking toolkit and amplify your impact, head to schoolofsocialimpact.org and check out our free Social Impact Foundations training. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, or have a story to share, you'll find the question submission form and guest expression of interest forms in the show notes. Tiana and the team would like to recognise the traditional owners of the land this podcast was produced on, and extend that to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. We extend our respect to all First Nations people globally and acknowledge that our community of changemakers are impacted by colonialism and extractive capitalism in different ways.